recent California bill signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom aimed to crack down on election deepfakes. Now, since then, the bill has been thrust into the spotlight, sparking a tiff between Newsom and billionaire Elon Musk and bringing into question how it would affect parody videos.
Musk shared a digitally manipulated video of Kamala Harris on X, originally called Kamala Harris Campaign Ad Parody, writing, quote, "The governor of California just made this parody video illegal in violation of the Constitution of the United States."
Journalist Michael Shellenberger recently wrote on X about the story, his post garnering over 25 million views. His post said, on September 27th, the New York Times accused Elon Musk of being, quote, misleading for criticizing a new California law to censor parody. The laws have exceptions for parody, said the Times. But 5 days later, a judge ruled the law unconstitutional. Why? Because it banned a video clearly labeled parody. Here now to discuss with us is Michael Shellenberger himself. Thank you for joining us. Let's get right into it. This video gets censored under the California law. The Times claims that parody is excluded. I think, to me, this just demonstrates the dangers of government trying to censor speech in any capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be with you guys. I mean, this is kind of a fun one, if we're being honest here. I mean, the video itself is pretty hilarious. It has Kamala Harris describing herself as a deep state puppet, which the judge, in his infinite wisdom, included in his ruling that the preliminary injunction to prevent the law from going into effect should be granted. The ad itself, or the parody, it said it was a parody, so it was clearly marked as that. As I noted, the New York Times called Elon Musk's tweet misinformation. What kind of misinformation? The kind of misinformation that's misleading. The technical word for that is malinformation, which refers to accurate information that could lead people to the wrong conclusions. We're deep into Orwell 1984 territory here. And I think it's, 1984 is such a, gloomy book because one of the characteristics of totalitarianism is that it outlaws humor and comedy. And so I think it's just such a powerful case in so many cases we've seen of censorship. You see, the central case in the lawsuit was around parody. And then the New York Times says that the law that California passed had exceptions for parody. So that was just false. So, I mean, there's just, you're sort of in a Borges novel at this point, A House of Mirrors, where, nothing really made any sense. And it's just another affirmation of why we want free speech. We want to allow a lot of debate, including a lot of comedy and the restoration of a kind of sense of humor.
And sometimes it's unavoidable that there will be wrong information or bad information on social media. One positive function that X has to address that is community notes. I've seen images that are fake or AI generated, and I can tell they are, but maybe some people can't. But often, immediately, what you find is there's a note under it from, crowdsourced from users saying, hey, this is not a real image, don't fall for this. And I think that's a tremendous, a counter to the idea that there needs to be this, very top-down regulation to make sure we don't have bad information, which would, as you point out, run afoul of the First Amendment anyway. But we do have a system for doing that, and it seems to it's still coming along. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what there is on other social media sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I just was with I'm going to be teaching a class at the University of Austin next year. I was just with my students, and we had this conversation. Free speech is one of these issues where you think you understand it. It seems straightforward, but there's this kind of continued complexity and richness to it. But just exactly to your point, Robbie, and the judge makes this point referring to a famous Supreme Court ruling, Sullivan versus New York Times, where the Supreme Court upholds the right of the spreading of misinformation, including disinformation or lies, particularly in political context. I mean, imagine having an election and the politicians not lying. That's kind of unthinkable. And it's just to your point, it's that the basic idea here, it's kind of a philosophical idea, it's sort of a political idea, is that we're all enriched by allowing people to tell their truth or lie from our point of view and then have the rebuttal. We always talk about this famous example of how the Supreme Court allowed Nazis to march through a neighborhood of Holocaust survivors in Illinois. You can defend that on sort of principle. Everyone has a right to speech. I think the other way you defend is you say you want to know who the Nazis are. You want to know who the liars are. You want to know who the purveyors of misinformation are. Then you can debunk them. You can argue with them. You can expose them. As somebody that enjoys public debate, thinks it's healthy, you should not want to silence your opponents. That's completely wrongheaded. What you should want to do is have that public argument with them. And just like you said, I think Community Notes has been really incredibly useful. And of course, Elon Musk, I think almost everything he writes is community noted, and you can see those. So yeah, I just think obviously, as journalists, our job is to go out there and debunk misinformation. We do that with more information, not by attempting to censor things behind the scenes.
Michael, let me play devil's advocate in the spirit of debate here a little bit, because one of the things about the judge's ruling that struck me is he doesn't, to what my reading, seem to be really completely lambasting the law. He talks about the fact that it's in its wording, it is a hammer rather than a scalpel. And the implication there is that a more scalpel-like approach would be worthy. And, thanks to us doing this segment, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning reading California legislative text today. And one of the purposes, or one of the preambles to this bill we're talking about, states that disinformation powered by generative AI will pollute our information ecosystem like never before. Voters will not know what images, audio, or video they can trust. Is that not a legitimate concern on your part? I mean, my worry is that you and my friend Robbie here are having too idealistic a view of how back and forth debate can correct what are pretty serious problems.
Well, I agree that misinformation and disinformation are serious problems. I mean, that's why I'm in the business of journalism. It's to correct information that we think is wrong. I guess the question is, how do you do that? And do you do it through more speech, through what we call counter speech? Or do you create some special committee of experts to do it behind the scenes? I think that's the question here is how do you want to do that? Now, I do think there are limits to freedom of speech. I actually share the Supreme Court's view of what kinds of speech should be limited. We don't allow speech that immediately incites violence, the test being the immediacy in time and space. We don't allow people to lie in order to steal money. That's fraud. We don't allow people to completely destroy your reputation by lying in order to bankrupt you. That's called defamation. However, that bar for the United States is much higher than it is, for example, in Britain. So I guess it's just a question of what is the best way to deal with disinformation and lying. And I think we've got a really good system here. Part of the tradition in the United States is that we don't allow, preemptive censorship. So we don't newspapers, for example, during apartheid in South Africa, and I remember because I would read the newspapers from South Africa while I was in college, there would be large chunks of the newspaper that had been censored in advance because the government censors had read the newspaper before it was published. We don't allow that sort of censorship to occur. Yet that was the kind of censorship that we saw the Department of Homeland Security promoting through its Cyber Security and Information Security Agency in 2020, 2021, through a set of NGOs to do the work of flagging or censoring the information that the social media companies would then take down. So I think it's just it's really a question of what is the best approach to deal with mis and disinformation. Is it to basically authorize a small group of people to engage in censorship behind closed doors, or is it better to have it out in the open and have a proper discussion?
All right. I think it's always important to remember that people being misinformed is also nothing new. We pay a lot of attention now to examples of viral things that are wrong or people falling for it, but people have believed a lot of crazy things for as long as humans have been around, and I've seen a lot of research lately showing that actually the problem might be more contained than we think it is on social media. That's a very small number of users who will repeatedly share flagrantly false information, which might suggest that we should calibrate how concerned we are about this, which is not to say it's not a concern, but it's a concern that we've dealt with in various platforms and modes of human communication for as long as there's been the spoken and the written word. Michael Shellenberger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.